Now, since Monday, well, we've all been talking about a certain Loretta Lamptey. Why? Because she is not just the Shrat boss, but she's accused of some extreme profligacy. She spent over $200,000 on accommodation, not just her, but Shraj as an institution. Now, the argument is that she was living in a rented apartment at the AU village, costing the nation $5,500. That was thought to be so much, so she moved into a hotel and was paying $456 a day. Now, if you calculate $456 by 30, that's the number of days we have in a month, that's more than $13,000. So we're not sure if a cost-benefit analysis was made. Well, this morning on the debate, we're asking, should government appointees be accommodated? Well, it's a debate that is raging. Should the state keep accommodating government appointees? So we want to argue for and against. So I'll quickly introduce to you a development consultant, Eben Anua Ama. I hope I got your name right.
You did.
So Eben is Ebenezer, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so Ebenezer Anua Ama, a development consultant who is speaking for the motion that indeed the state should continue to accommodate government appointees. When we say accommodate government appointees, it means to provide shelter for them. The state must be responsible for their accommodation. Now, speaking against the motion is Yao Opong, a very familiar face on the show. He's a legal practitioner and he's speaking against it. Yeah, it's good to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
Now, I'm only a moderator, so there is a judge who would actually decide who won and who lost. Whoever wins the debate this morning will get a cup of Lipton for free. Anyway, so our judge this morning is Ato Afo. Ato Afo is a media and communication specialist. I understand you also do some service, offer some service at the AUCC.
Yeah.
All right, so Ato Afo is our judge. What are the rules of engagement this morning?
Well, good morning to your viewers this morning. Rules of engagement, very simple, like any other debate. You are supposed to be articulate enough, make we understand what you're saying, and then try to do rebuttals. It would also help, because once A makes an argument and B counters it, doesn't stand anymore.
Okay.
So that's
all right. So
rules, yeah.
Those are the rules for engagement. So we'll go to you straight, Eben Anua Ama, speaking for the motion.
Good morning to our viewers. Since we are contributing to the national kitty by way of taxes and so on and so forth, it's a responsibility of government to provide decent accommodation for all citizens. However, for the number one employee of the state, that is the president himself, it behoves on the state to provide tools for engagement, and that is one, accommodation and other things. But the president alone cannot do all the work, so he has to appoint people. He has to appoint regional ministers to take care of the regions, and the municipal chief executives for the metros and the municipal assemblies and district assemblies. Government also needs to employ people to do foreign work for him in foreign missions, in other words, and ambassadors, etc., and into international organizations. If all these people are working for government and working on behalf of the president, then I believe that just as the president is giving accommodation as part of his working conditions, these persons also need to be given accommodation for them to be able to perform very well. Why accommodation? One, they need to have fixed, recognizable locations where people can go to, easily accessible, to conduct their business, not only for their families, but also to the public. People can always go to them, conduct business and do other things. It must be safe, it must be secured, and that's the reason why just nobody can get up and say, I want to live anywhere in this country and therefore give me money to go and construct my own house. It must be a house that has been constructed by state that meets certain specs. So I believe that in order to be effective, government should, or the state should keep on providing accommodation for all its employees. I can understand what has happened, especially over the past few weeks, but then the lady didn't really do anything wrong per se. It was part of her working conditions. If somebody didn't provide decent accommodation, then it is not her fault to go and live somewhere else. So government must keep on providing decent accommodation for all its appointees.
Okay, so the judge has signaled that your time is up. By the way, how many minutes Do they have each?
For the opening statement, just 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, your turn now.
Well, I'm surprised that the rules were not made known to us before we started, but we may do. If we breach them, forgive us, because we didn't have first hand notice. I mean, I'll just start from where you ended. I think that it is even too dangerous to make open or known to people where, for example, a judge lives. It is a danger to their health, and in fact, it can cause tragic situation. I mean, in terms of people can go there and kill them or harm them. That is number one, and that's one of the reasons why I'm opposed to it. You can see the residence of so and so, very prominent person, and everybody knows where judges live in this country, at least in Accra. It's too dangerous. Number one. Number two, when you read the Rent Act, it only applies to tenants other than tenants in government buildings. And one of the important regulations or rules in the Rent Act is that you have to leave the premises in a tenantable condition. Look around, see the state in which some public officers have rendered state property into ruins because the Rent Act doesn't apply to it. Again, the state can pay advance, what we call the advance payment for rent, because the Rent Act doesn't apply to such persons. And so when you look at all these, in my view, the best procedure or framework is just consolidate all these allowances and benefits and just pay them as part of salaries and allowances. You can also tax them on the total amount that the person has received, including accommodation. That is, if we're talking about accommodation in terms of residential accommodation only. When it comes to offices and so on, I'm not opposed to it. Of course, they need such, but when it comes to residential accommodation, I'm saying that let us just consolidate all these amounts into one. It becomes part of their salaries, wages, emoluments, or compensation, and the state can also tax them on it. But the main point for me is that the fact that they live in such government bungalows, it takes them away from the Rent Act and all the important provisions that are made therein, including even conviction if the person, as it were, breaches any of the specific provisions. And so it's important that we just ensure that people just come under the main rules that have been set out and not to exclude public officers, and then they can be in the position to do, with all due respect to them, whatever they may choose, because at the end of the day, are you not surprised therefore, or probably you are not, that anytime any public officer leaves a premises, they will have to spend thousands of Ghana cedis or maybe $1 million. Well, there was an example where somebody had to, I understand, collect even carpets and other furniture from the place, and then it gives opportunity to people to engage in what we call rent seeking, so that if a cousin of his or hers has a property which no one wants to rent, then the person will just get the state to rent it at such huge amount. Again, finally on this one, under the Rent Act, it is the rent officer who assesses what is the appropriate rent to be paid. Under this situation that we have, nobody assesses that, and so they can engage in profligate rentals and so on, which they may not need, because if you ask them to use their own money, I bet you they would never use their money to rent such a property for themselves.
Okay, we'll come to you.
Well, if you just allow anyone to pick a rent advance to acquire his own accommodation, for example, if I'm working as the regional minister for Greater Accra, I can decide to site my house maybe in Kumasi to my convenience. So can you imagine traveling between Kumasi and Accra to work? That would be a major no for me. It's important that government looks for fixed locations and then say that if you are working as a regional minister or as a chief executive, you need to stay within a particular location, in a particular district, in a particular region. If you are working as an ambassador, you need to live in a particular place, in a particular region of that foreign nation, so that you can be located very easily, so you can do your work much more effectively. Now, the idea that people, will get their houses renovated, for me, is neither here nor there, because they don't, or they are not supposed to do it all by themselves. There are state institutions that are supposed to take care of those things. if those state institutions are not doing their work, we can tax them to do their work much more appropriately, not the individuals. And we need to ensure that the rules are working. That people don't just you go out there and ask for their own private innovations. Things that have been stated clearly, guidelines that are being followed. So I will totally disagree that for government workers, we should just give them money for them to go and rent houses anywhere of their choices. We need to continue to house them as part of their conditions of work, just like the president. So they have their peace of mind, they have a safe place, a secure place, socially acceptable place, not only for themselves but also for the general public.
Yes, I think that the evidence may also contradict what he's saying. I mean, parliamentarians, 270 or so, they are giving rent monies to go and rent their own property. They have not decided to live in their constituencies to come to work here. Parliament is the center place where they work most of their time, and they are not housed by the state. They are giving rent money. You know, I have problems with that as well, because I mean, sometimes you feel that people really have their houses here and they will still take money. That's another argument. So I'm saying that to the extent that the parliamentarians who represent all Ghanaians are giving monies to go and find their own accommodation, I do not see how a regional minister should be different. In any case, a large number of these regional ministers are also parliamentarians, and they have, after they have taken them, they have not decided to go, if it's a regional minister in Accra, to go elsewhere. In any case, the evidence now is that nearly, well, I think with the exception of 2 or so, nearly all the regional ministers are from the very place where they are appointed. Until recently, when there had been some 1 or 2 reshuffle, maybe from Eastern region to Accra, and a number of them. But largely, most of the regional ministers are indigenes of that very place where, or part of the region. So I don't think that can really support the argument, to the extent that parliamentarians are able to live anywhere in Accra or in the country, and yet there's no evidence that they've not been able to perform their functions as parliamentarians. They go to parliament and they are not constrained by the fact that they were giving monies to rent a place instead of giving government bungalows. And so for me, I think that the appropriate thing, in my view, is I just give them the monies, assess the appropriate rent exigible, and then just give it to them to rent these places. And if they run the property into ruins, they have a problem with their landlords and not with the state. And so that we can spend these monies rather on other, maybe equally or more important projects like hospitals. I mean, people are being turned from Kolebu and other places because they don't have appropriate medicine for cholera and things like that. And why should we just continue to pay such every time people leave the government or state property, we have to spend a lot of money. Look at this example. For 3 years, we've not even been able to renovate a place for the strike boss. I understand that a place is now being built for the vice president. You know how much money that will cost? When other people, very basic needs are still not being met. I understand that the handicapped people, I mean, for want of a better word, yesterday we heard that even the basic special schools, the basic monies that should be paid them for food in schools and other accessories is not being paid. And yet we are thinking about spending millions on people who, to a large extent, and then for me, if you investigate, you see a lot of these people already have their own accommodation. Some will take the money and rather rent out these properties for others to live in it, for them to collect rent from it. These are matters that are very familiar to all of us. And so, I mean, with all due respect to to a few of them who I think genuinely may need some of this property, but which I still think that they will be better off if they are giving the money as part of compensation.
He has considered really that some people need government accommodation. That ends the
no, that is the objective.
That ends the debate.
That is, it doesn't.
Now, he was talking about parliamentarians. We are talking about government appointees. Two are different. A government appointee may be a parliamentarian, he may not be a parliamentarian.
Yeah.
If such a person needs accommodation as a basic tool to perform his or her functions, Why not do that? That does not mean that we shouldn't provide for the needs of those who have special needs. We need to do that. But then if they need accommodation, they need to provide those accommodation. He mentioned about doctors in Korle Bu. So can you imagine when you give money to a doctor and he rents a house maybe around East Legon, whereas he will be needed quite close to Korle Bu, the hospital itself? It creates a whole lot of troubles. My view should be that give them specific locations, houses fit for their job so they can always be by the sick people. There's two examples that he cited seem to confirm my argument that if people need housing as part of their working conditions to be effective, government must provide that for them. Simple.
But I think you are getting me wrong, really. I'm not saying that they don't need accommodation. I'm saying that they do need it, but give them the money, let them go and find their own accommodation. That's what issues. Then in that same vein, doctors at Korle Bu are not government appointees. They are not. We are talking generally about public officers.
They are working for the state.
Well, yes, so we are talking just the same as parliamentarians. Yeah. We are talking about public officers and whether or not the state should provide accommodation or a place of convenience for them in terms of where they will sleep and where they will spend part of their night outside workplace.
My argument is this: if they need it for their work, the state must provide it. Just like if they need a car or telephones or whatever it is for their work, government must provide it. At the end of the day, they need to do a good job for Mother Ghana, so all of us will be satisfied. Yeah. We cannot say that because there have been abuses in the system, we need to scrap this entire process. No, I wouldn't say that. Yeah. If government sees to it that the right thing is done at the right time, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about somebody abusing accommodation, staying in a village somewhere or staying in a hotel and spending so much money. As far as I'm concerned, that happened because somebody didn't do his or her work properly at the right time, and that's the reason why the lady went to stay in a hotel. If we are doing the right thing and we are playing by the rules, this condition wouldn't arise.
But it is the same thing we're talking about. Listen, I mean, we're saying that why do you give a tool for which is capable of being used as for purposes of rent seeking and corruption to people? It is the same way. That is why we are saying that because those things are subject to abuse, why don't you rather fashion out a better mechanism, which is that this is the money you are entitled to for a month. Part of it is accommodation. The banks and the other companies do it. Because, people are giving this property. We don't even go and check whether they are really living in it. It is these possibilities that have informed this argument that, know what, just give the money to him, let him use it for whatever he thinks fit, but he should ensure that you also work for it. Yeah. Because there is no evidence, as I said, there is no evidence that because people are provided with accommodation, even the economy is doing well. I mean, people have accommodation as public officers, and yet look at where we are. So I don't think that it is the main deciding factor as to whether people can be competent or not. If a doctor decides to stay at East Legon and come to work at Korle Bu, all that the employer expects of him is that if you are to get to work at 7, you should be there at 7. If you don't go to work at 7, you've taken your accommodation and decided to leave at Pram and come to work at Korle Bu. Nobody cares about that. So that should not be a reason why you should provide accommodation for the person because of proximity. If he really wants to work and earn that particular amount, then he should position himself. He can decide to live at East Legon and leave the house 5 a.m. if he's to report at 7. If he decides to leave the house like 6 o'clock, knowing that there is a 6 traffic from the airport to Korle Bu, he has himself to blame, and not because he's not been given accommodation. The fact that, and I'm saying that the fact that people are given accommodation has not confirmed their competence, in my view, because we still have serious challenges, some say crisis, related to the economy. And why hasn't the provision of accommodation solved those problems?
We can also say that there's evidence to provide, that people who are giving tools to work like accommodation have been competent because they've had time, to focus on their work. But let me go back to your argument. Because of abuse, we need to discontinue, government needs to discontinue giving accommodation to its appointees. Now, let's have an analogy. A simple kitchen knife. It is a neutral technology, neutral tool. I can use the knife purposefully to slice vegetables, to slice meats, chop meat, etc. I can use the knife also to kill.
Yeah.
Do you blame the knife?
Go ahead.
Would you blame the knife?
No, I don't. But what it is?
Absolutely. So I'm saying that if the tool is good and the tool is being abused, it's not the fault of the tool. You see, so if they need the accommodation to do their work effectively, and people are abusing it, it does not mean we should throw that thing away completely. All we have to do is to ensure that we are using that tool to do the work it's supposed to do. Let's house government appointees, let them perform their duties. If they fail to perform their duties, then we can hold them accountable, because they have been provided a very, 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 very necessary tool to do their work.
But I'm saying that
I'm concerned.
As far as private companies are concerned, I mean banks, nobody provides even the bank manager with a property built by the bank itself for him to stay in at the, let's for example, Prudential Bank head office. Nobody does that. And yet we know that these banks and private companies are doing even far better than state institutions. Why are we selling state institutions where the managers are even giving accommodation by the state? Because they are not performing. You understand? So private companies have shown that you do not need to provide accommodation for the managing director at the premises of the head office for them to do well. All you need to do is to strengthen the rules. He knows that if he is giving 10,000 Ghana cedis a year for accommodation, he will find a decent accommodation with it. I mean, for example, if you have a phone and the credits are bought by your company, you use it differently. You use it anyhow you want it. But if you are using your own money to buy those units, definitely you will restrict yourself in terms of the way you know. I mean, there are no arguments about this thing. But the point really is that I'm saying that private companies, for example, have not provided accommodation for their workers at the premises, at least the top management at the premises of the companies, and yet the growing evidence is that they are doing far better than public offices. And so, I mean, in my view, there is too much abuse, because one, the Rent Act is not applicable to public properties or premises rent given to public officers, and also because there is no evidence that provision of accommodation to public officers have aided or facilitated the growing of the economy or development of Ghana, as against private companies who don't provide these things and yet they are doing better.
We'll give you a few seconds for your wrap-up statement.
Well, he just mentioned state, private sector, and I'll even add civil society organizations. These are three organs and they have different roles to play. Again, an analogy. If you look at the traditional stove, it has three stands, okay? If you arrange the stands properly and very well, then you can put a pot on it and have your meal cook for you. The state is one stand. The private sector is one stand. Civil society is another stand. If we take out the state, can you imagine what will happen to the pot? We'll go into ditch. So if we allow only private people to run this country without the state intervening, all of us are going to end up into ditch.
Who is saying that?
Absolutely. And that's the reason why. So if private sector people are saying that they are not going to provide accommodation to their workers, should we follow? No. I believe that accommodation is extremely needed by all workers, and particularly if you are working for government, you are doing government business and it's part of your working conditions, then you must be giving accommodation to be effective.
Thank you very much, Eben. Yao.
Oh, well, I mean, simply put, I'm saying that does give them, there should be a provision for rent. Give them that money, let them determine where they want to live, in what particular accommodation. Of course, the rent should be assessed by the rent control, the accredited statutorily appointed officers who know how much you should spend on a property as rent at cantonment as against, let's say, any other place. I mean, so in comparison, they will give you the assessment. The situation we have, and also because the landlord, now what some of them even do is that you have to put down a deposit, so that if you run the property into ruins, or you allow it, you don't maintain it in a tenantable condition, they will use that money to renovate it or put it back in the state it was when you entered. This situation where we allow, I mean, just look around, we allow people to just be in property, with all due respect to them, but I'm saying that the evidence, as we all see, is that there hasn't been any confirmation that mere provision of accommodation to government officials or public officers has led to the growth of the economy or has bettered our circumstances. I'm saying that give them the money, as you have done for the parliamentarians, and let them determine what they should use the money for. If they decide to live in Sweden and come to Accra every morning, that is their own problem, but you not blame it on the fact that you gave him the money and he decided to go and establish his home somewhere else.
Okay, thank you very much. Atwafo.
Yes, all right, both speakers have done well, I should say, very articulate. I'll begin with the speaker for the motion, Eben, using quite a number of analogies. Beautiful. He made a point that it's a responsibility of the state to provide accommodation for its officials, both home and abroad. He mentioned missions abroad and all that. He also said there's a need to have recognizable accommodation which is safe and secured and also accessible to the public. Then thirdly, he said that the state should have general specs or specializations or specifications for accommodation that provides its officials across board. So he justified that. And then he made another point that when you talk of geographical locations of institutions and then respective accommodations, there's a need to accommodate officials who are in charge so they can have a easy movement of the people and all that. And then finally, he also said that when you look at any kind of employment, it comes with terms of conditions. He kept mentioning the president. So if it's done for the president, it should be done for everybody also in the public sector. And then one statement that he made that also struck my attention was that he said that the fact that people are abusing the system and there's negligence of duty does not negate the need for accommodation for public officials. And then you look at Yao, who spoke vehemently against the motion. He says that security-wise, it is not safe and it's not good enough to make public where public officials are living. So he tried to negate that point. And then he said also that there has been improper care of state accommodation by these officials and this led to waste of finances. So for him, he doesn't think that the state should continue giving accommodation to public officials. Yeah, relax. And then he also said that if you look at the Rent Act, it doesn't conform with the kind of accommodation or given to the public officials. So using that also to say that no need for state to continue. And then he says that Parliament is a very good example that we can replicate, can follow. So if the MPs are not given accommodation per se, but rent money, why can't we do the same for the public sector? And then finally, he said that in terms of trying to prioritize state funding, he mentioned people with disabilities, for example, and other institutions, think that there's a need to channel resources to sectors that really need them most. And so just as Eben talked about abuse and negligence, not negating the need for state accommodating public officials, he's also saying that they need to learn from private sector. I mean, states should learn from private sector where they don't give accommodation to officials, but they give them percentages. So he's talking about prudent use of resources. And so basically, these are the points that both have made. One thing that really stands out from the two arguments is that you realize that one size doesn't fit the system. They both agree to some extent because I have 5 points and then 5 points there. You know, they both apply. I mean, yeah, you both agree that there should be a blend of the system. There should be a kind of how do you put it? I mean, the state may give accommodation to certain officials, and for others you give them rent money. So as a judge for the day, lovely Friday, apply.
So it's a draw.
It's a draw.
I feel like a Chelsea fan, a visual last student drawing.
And I'm one.
And you're
And I'm one too.
And you're
That's Man U.
exactly. That makes us two.
You're Man U.
Yeah. And I am as well.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
can't you see?
Yeah.
It's written all over me.
Anyway,
thank you very much. I have to
down.
Thank you. Our judge from AUCC, Media and Communication Specialist, Atwafo. He probably scared that one of them may just draw out a sword. So he says, Apai.
Somebody mentioned the knife, actually.
That's very true. And then Ebenewa spoke for the motion that Anoa Ama. He says that the state should continue to provide accommodation for its appointees. And also Yaopon says that indeed it is not wise enough because we keep spending monies that should be used for other sectors of the economy. All right, so thank you very much, Ato. Thank you, Yao, and thank you, Eben. All right.